Hello everyone and welcome to Neighbors to Know. I'm Jenn Puhle and I want to thank you so much for joining us for our very first episode of this new show. I want to take a moment to talk about the nature of what the show is about since it is our new show before I introduce our first guest. So back in the day, when I first bought my first house in New York, I had gotten an address book in the mail from the Welcome Wagon, which was in the mail, which people don't use anymore, and I don't know if a lot of people know what the Welcome Wagon even is. But the Welcome Wagon is an organization that connects you with businesses that are in town. So if your sink starts to overflow, you know who to call. If you need to bring your car in wherever, you know who to call. But what I want to know is who are the people that were living on my street that I would be seeing every day. So at the time, I was working full-time, and my neighbors, for the most part, were too. So you would see them checking their mail or whatever, pulling their cards out, just give them a quick wave, shoveling the driveway and saying whatever about how there's way too much snow in upstate New York or whatnot. But there really wasn't a chance to sit there and have a long conversation because everyone had somewhere to be. And I think that's kind of how things have gone as time has gone on. So the whole point in Neighbors to Know is to create that opportunity for you to get to know your neighbors on a deeper level and beyond just shoveling snow and talking about the weather. I moved from New York to Massachusetts, and I was lucky enough to have the opportunity then to be a stay-at-home mom for a while. And I got to know a lot of different people through organizations, through my kids, through church, through whatnot. And those people didn't all know each other. So I met a lot of really extraordinary people that were doing amazing things. And I'd go to a scout meeting, for example, and talk about someone. And they'd say, Jen, I have no idea who you're talking about. I'm like, but you should know who these people are. And they live down the street from you. How do you not know who they are? So Neighbors to Know was born. We introduce you to people that are in our town and neighboring towns, and they even live on your street and you don't know who they are. Many people win accolades and awards, and that's how you know who they are. And we invite you to learn the extraordinary things that your neighbors are up to, whether they've won a trophy or not. So on that note, I'd like to introduce our very first guest, who is Miss Ann Seamans. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Jen.
It's so great to have you on.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I'm glad to have you as my first guest. So I first met you on Bedford TV News, which has been about 3.5 years ago that you came on. The show started about 4 years ago. So why don't you talk about a little about what you do at the news, because you've had a lot to do with Bedford TV as a whole, but let's start talking about the news.
Well, at the news, I do the soundboard, usually, and sometimes, even though at first I was reluctant, Greg has asked me to sit in for someone like yourself when you're out. And that was kind of challenging at first, but I've come to be okay with it.
And you do the weather outside.
And I did the weather, yes.
And it's live, so not intimidating at all.
Well, but I honestly, he's a very good executive director because he just let me do it slowly, and as a result, I've come a long way from my original fear.
And how did you find out about volunteering at the news in the first place?
Well, I don't know. I don't remember exactly how I heard about volunteering, but I had first met Bedford TV when my daughter was ill.
Talk a little bit about your daughter.
Do you want me to?
Yes, yes.
Well, Heather in January 2006 was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer, and it was a surprise. She was in the hospital for a month and not doing very well, allergic to chemo, and I had photos of her, but we were afraid what was about to happen, and I didn't have her talking or being Heather. And someone suggested that I come to Bedford TV and borrow equipment from them because I never had a video camera. So that was my original exposure to Bedford TV, and I used a camera borrowed from them until eventually she did get better and I could go out and find one for myself. And then somehow they were advertising for volunteers, and I thought that would be a good thing for me to do, to be able to give back to them what they had done for my own family.
So how are you tying in Heather being ill with the stuff that you were pulling together a documentary? Correct?
Well, someone at the time, I've gone through several management teams at Bedford TV.
Yes.
I was originally a woman, I think her name was Kim.
Kim Barber.
And someone who worked with her suggested that I make a film about it. And for myself, until then, it was just so I'd have her. And that's what I do have, is film for her. But I started filming with the idea of doing a documentary about her. I put it on hold because in October of 2013, she did pass away, and I've just started working on it again. And I'm actually quite excited to work on it now, because just doing some of the shoots and some of the filming for Bedford TV, I think I'm better than I would have been if I had pushed it through earlier. So that's been a surprise for me just this last month as I started working on it again.
And Heather had quite a journey prior to being diagnosed.
Well, she did, because she had something called Williams syndrome. She was diagnosed early as a 2-year-old, and in those days they just called children retarded and told us to put her somewhere in an institution and have another baby. And this was Mass General, so it was a well-renowned hospital, and have another child right away, which is something we didn't do. We kept her. And as a result, she grew into a really good person who could read, we traveled extensively. She worked at Papagino's, she worked at Raytheon. So she had a full life, which would have been different if we had followed her. At the time, it was just different thinking.
Right.
There weren't opportunities that are available now for people with disabilities.
And I just found out this morning that May is Williams Syndrome Awareness Month, which you didn't know.
No, I didn't know. Well, this is timely then.
I guess it was just meant to be, Ann.
Yes, it was.
But the interesting thing, because I had never heard of it until you mentioned it to me. But the interesting thing, as I was reading about it, it is quite complex. But they have some videos on their website, and the kids are just so cheery and happy. And one thing that this is totally off the fly, because I just found this out this morning, but there was one unique thing that they talk about. Adults and children with Williams syndrome tend to have a drive for music. I'm not quite sure what that's about.
They're not. They do research. They're doing research on both at BU about both Williams syndrome and autism, because they're almost polar opposites.
In what way?
Well, because Williams people are totally sociable. They're just way out there. They love people. They do have this added musical ability. Heather had it. She sang in talent shows. She could sing perfect pitch. Her voice wasn't like astounding, but it was pleasant and it was nice. So they're looking to see how this happens. And children with Williams usually have some kind of learning disability, a lot of heart problems, which isn't true of people with autism. So it's just a project, I guess, that's going on at BU to see how it works. When I took Heather to our first, she wasn't diagnosed until October 2005. So all those years we didn't know what her. I know. And then 3 months later, she was diagnosed with cancer. So it was like a lot all at once. But we went to a convention, and they, not as pronounced as Down syndrome, but Williams people have a similar look.
I noticed
really
that.
Interesting. It's like a gammon kind of, and they walk on tippy toes quite often. So I've decided that they probably were the fairies in literature.
Oh, that's such a sweet way of looking at things.
Well, it's just, how things go into children, any kind of literature based on truth sometimes. So I made that up, but that's what I think.
You just made that up now.
No, I've made it up before now. But it's nothing to do with anybody else.
So you came back to the documentary. So where are you right now?
Just redoing it. It's like I have a different story to tell from where I started. But I think I'm amazed at how many people still don't know about people with disabilities. I assume because there's so much more attention to it now.
Right.
But not many people do not know of any kind of person with any kind of disability. So
and I think
that's the driving force.
Yeah, and to get awareness out there, I think people are afraid to talk about it too.
Yeah,
it's a tough
It's very personal.
It is very personal, and when it's your child too, it's you want to protect them, but you want to learn. And, I think going out there to learn about whatever you can, whether it's online, but you kind of need a group of people to get to. Actually, that's a really great segue that I didn't even intend to do.
Well,
you really need a great group of people for support to get you through all of that. Which, ironically, I really didn't mean to do that, but brings me to your special Friday nights that you have.
Oh, Friday Night Fun Club.
Your Friday Night Fun Club. That's the best name ever.
Well, it is for these Heather and her friends. It was started by the parents back in the 70s in Concord, but it brings in Bedford all kinds of towns, and I've been running it for 14 years. Because now they're adults, and there are other opportunities that have come into being. In the old days, there was nothing for them recreationally, so the parents came up with Friday Night Fun Club. We do social things. We eat at the Chinese restaurant in Bedford, or we go bowling out in Acton, and
are the parents involved in that too, or
no?
is it just...
It's getting harder and harder to have parents involved, because I think I can relate to it that it takes a lot of time and energy to have a child that needs extra attention. So this is a way of having them get what they need, and they don't have to be involved. But I had two friends, Vicki Andrews from Lexington and Patty McCann from Sudbury, and the three of us have been running it for. Well, I guess I've done it for almost 14 years, and they've done it for 12.
The website says 14 years. So it must be true.
I hope so. And it's fun, and I'm really impressed that you went out and looked at the website for Friday Night Fun Club and for Williams syndrome.
You're all over the place, and that's what I mean. There's places where you can find out all this, and I had no idea about any of these things. Had I not be tied in with the news,
well, it was funny one day in the
know.
station because Paula, I don't know how to say her last name.
Gilardi
turned around, and she's very active, like in the Rotary, and said, "What's this Friday Night Fun Club?" Because it's listed in Bedford, because that's where my address is as a nonprofit. And so I raised my hand and said, "That's me."
She's the one actually that got me to go on Bedford TV News too.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, she has plans up her sleeve.
Yeah, she does.
So I'm switching gears a little bit. You've been on many travels in your life. You lived over in England for a
We
time.
did. We moved to Bedford in I was going to say 18.
In 1820.
Yeah, in
Ann looks
1820.
really good for her age.
We moved to Bedford 32 years ago, and then in September of 91, my husband's job took him to London, where we went for a year and ended up staying for 12 years. We came home. Luckily, we kept our house because I really liked our house, and so we rented it. And for a while, I did do it as a B&B even. But so there's a big gap in living in Bedford, but we always kept this house here.
I was going to bring a segue into our mugs.
Oh, earlier.
Because Heather's on one of the mugs. You made these for her 50th birthday?
Yes.
And Heather's on one side, excuse me, and there's another guy there that may or may not be easy to recognize on there.
Gregory McGuire.
Yeah. So Ann has, you have a great, let's take a, here, cheers. There we go.
Cheers.
Yeah, so you've brought on some interesting people onto Bedford TV News, and you always have a story like, I was on the plane and just started having chit chat, and hey, I met this guy, and then turns out later he's like on Broadway. I'm like, what?
Well, actually, I met Gregory in London because his brother had worked with me at Lotus, where I worked during the 80s and until we went to London. And so when his brother Joe found out we were moving to London, he said, "Oh, I have a brother you've got to meet," and had a really nice dinner party. And Gregory came looking for us in London, and he was only like 5, 6, 7 blocks away. And he was just before he wrote Wicked. So he was like, his career, and my career was on hold because, I'd gone with my husband. And we would have tea together almost every week, Heather, Greg, and I. And we would start off with tea and end up with Pinot Grigio.
That's a segue.
So that was part of how I knew him. And then, of course, his life just took off and his writing. And so we were friends before he was famous.
And then you brought Valerie Lyman on, too.
Well, Valerie Lyman is because of the filmmaking. I had belonged to a group called Connect the Dots. That was for not published, but filmmakers who had already produced films, but also included people like myself over at the Coolidge Corner Theater. And afterwards we met and talked about my documentary, so she did some filming for my documentary and we became friends. And she's now a fellow at Harvard, but she's changed her direction towards photography, which we went to see out at the Waterworks Museum.
Yeah, that was really neat.
She filmed all the fracking rush or whatever in North Dakota, the boomtown stuff, and which was really interesting, and showed it on the equipment.
Yeah, the museum was really neat.
I know, it was really fun.
But there are
night.
places and things that I would never have even known to go to, because I didn't know there were things until I had met you.
I know, it's fun.
Like those, 6 degrees of separation, which is where this, cockamamie idea of a show
I think it's
came from. But going back to what you're saying about the, so, I mean, I want to thank you for bringing all these people on with your dynamic personality that, you're like, went to Red Heat the other day and I happened to meet, I don't know, Nicolas Cage. Who knows? Well, who knows who'll come in next week or whatever. But the Airbnb part, I know several people who live on your street who don't know each other and have no idea that there's a B&B on Concord Road, which makes me laugh. And I mean, I don't want to get into too many specifics of, yes, this is where Ann lives, because that's just creepy. But so how did the whole Airbnb idea get started for you? I mean, your home is gorgeous.
Well, it is an old house in Bedford, and so people come to this area. They usually go to Concord or Lexington looking for B&Bs because those are the well-known towns. Bedford's not known. And I was living in this house by myself, and I thought, well, it would really be fun to bring people into Bedford as well as into the old house. So luckily I was in a good marketing day that I didn't call it the Timothy Jones house, which is what the house is known as in Bedford, but I called it a historic 1775 house. And I've been amazed. It's like almost August is totally booked except for 1 month. And the people who come are so interesting. There's a man from Russia, and he said he didn't speak English, but he did more than I spoke Russian for sure. Couples coming from Australia. And then there was a woman that came who was the 9th generation of Joe Blaine in the Joe Blaine house.
That's interesting.
So Jeanette Pothier and
that would be a
Julie
great person
Turner.
to have on yours, actually, because I'm sure she's got some great stories.
Well, they did a tour. They came to my house for breakfast, and then they did a tour, and I filmed it for Bedford TV. It's out on our YouTube, Bedford. But funny things happen. I don't know. Do we have time for me to tell you?
Yes, we do.
So people come to the B&B and they forget things, And this year it was Christmas time, and it was like 2 weeks before Christmas, and I had put off returning their items, but I knew I should. And on Saturday, the only post office that's open until 2 is Lexington. So I drove to Lexington. There was a huge long line. I looked at the 2 men behind the counter, and they were really working hard, both of them. But one of them was taking time to explain all your options, overnight, whatever. And the other one was quiet and just getting everybody through. So I wanted the quiet man. And luckily I got the quiet man and walked up to him. He took my first package, put it on the scale, and said, "And what's in here?" And I said, "Oh, it's just somebody's teeth." And he started laughing really hard.
And then he just said, "Is that fragile, liquid, or perishable?" And just stamped it, and off it went.
And then I started laughing because he was laughing until tears came down my face. And then I left and walked over. In Lexington, you go park behind the stores.
Yeah.
And I had stopped laughing, but the tears were still rolling down my face. And this woman right near my car stopped in front of me and said, "Are you okay?" Which I thought was so sweet. Anyway, that's just one of the B&B stories. They're really fun.
That sounds like a hoot. So the last thing I want to talk to you about, you've been involved with the town and obviously here with the B&B. There's so many different aspects of what you do all around. But recently you joined one of the committees in town, which I guess makes sense given your home and all the history behind it.
Yes. Actually, Bedford TV has kind of for the most recent years been like the hub of my life. It's in my mind more. It's like in the old day they had general stores or they'd have soda fountains and then where people would come together, and I see that here. So
like the
People come
trading
into the
post.
station. Yeah, it's
Just
like
hang
they
up
come
your
in
horse and
from
come on in.
Ages from 3rd grade all the way up to elderly people. So one of them, Patty Carluccio, has been helping me with gardens because she does a show called Pretty Simple Gardens, and I loved the way she did it. I'm not a gardener, but she would talk in little pieces about rhododendrons, and then I asked her if she'd help me, so she did, and then she said there was an opening on this Historic Preservation Commission, and she thought I should try it because of my old house and my interest in our old houses and buildings in Bedford.
What kinds of things do they, because I'm not aware too much of what they
Well, we're looking at preserving as many of the old buildings that we can. We're going through a boom in Bedford, and so many of the old houses, buildings are being torn down and replaced. So we're a subset. I mean, we're just an arm of, there's another committee as well. And people who want to come with their builder to discuss demolishing buildings before, I guess the cutoff was in the 40s, and now it may be in the 50s. They have to look at what they're trying to do, both with the size and the way the building looks and where the neighborhood is. It's an attempt to preserve our heritage, make people think twice about tearing down some of these buildings. So we're losing them a lot.
That's a lot given the history of the town.
Yeah, it's interesting when you get involved in it because whole sections that are now the town used to be big old houses or churches, and it's changed a lot. And change is what happens, but it's good in a town like Bedford or even Lexington and Concord to think about what our heritage is and why people are attracted to us and to the area.
And then they can go to your B&B and just live it. Your home is just so warm and inviting. I mean,
well, it's fun. I really like the people that come.
Yeah. And once you're there, you don't kind of leave. Like when I was talking to Ann about what we're going to talk about on the show, we were chatting, and all of a sudden it's noon and 4 hours have passed.
I know.
That's
fun.
Just what happens. You're just kind of enveloped in this whole thing.
And the man who's staying with me now comes like every month to work at the VA hospital, and he wanted his wife to come and meet me and see the house, so he brought her this weekend. And my friend Myra was there, so they brought some food, and I had some food, and we sat and ate. I think it was Saturday night. It was so much fun. I mean, it was really just fun.
Yeah.
His wife is from Guyana. I don't know if I said that right, but so I love that kind of happening,
And I think it's easy because of the way you are personality-wise, This is where you get all modest and blush, But it's true, or else I wouldn't have asked you to come on.
And so that's fun.
Yeah, and you radiate this, energy. You do. Okay. That, I think draws people to you because you're, down to earth and easy to get along with and have your fun Fridays. And but you've done so many wonderful things for the town.
Nice
you really have. And you're certainly an admirable neighbor to know here in Bedford. Wait, do you want tissue? Are you going to cry?
And I've enjoyed getting to know you with the whole team here. It's really great to know.
So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for asking me.
It's very exciting.
And good luck with your show. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, we'll see who else. It's funny, the people that have come out of the woodwork that I don't even know. Obviously I know you, and there's some people I had in my head about having them come on, and then some people that I didn't even know. I knew who. This is a perfect point. I knew of them. I had heard their names before, but I didn't know what they were up to. Which again, see, these are the natural segues into bringing on to the next, few episodes. But, I hope that you've enjoyed watching and getting to know Ann and all her generous ways that she gives back to the town, whether it's your being, well, it is, you cringe, but it's true. Like I said, there are people that I know of but don't necessarily know. So if there are people that, whether I might know them or not, that you think would be neighbors to know in Bedford, I invite you to reach out. You can follow Neighbors to Know on Twitter or on Facebook, or you can email neighborstoKnow@gmail.com. Check your spelling. Neighbors, E-I, I before E, except after C. No one will forget that if people watch the show. So our next episode, we will have someone on that I actually don't know very well, so it'll be a nice change, and I'll get to know this person more. You can take a peek again on the social media to see more little tidbits about who that person is. And I promise you it will be an utterly amusing show, and I say that literally and figuratively. So on that note, I want to thank you so much. Thank you to Ann, and thank you for everyone who tuned in for today. And we hope to see you next time. I'm Jenn Puhle. Thank you.